We are looking at the whole issue of what I've entitled as running together, the importance of running or working or living with strong relationships in our lives. If you can remember way back first session, we looked at team building, didn't we? Wasn't that the first one we did, I think? And of course, how important that is. What I want to try and look at tonight is just the importance of building strong relationships in our lives. So this might spill over into what it feels like in your team. But even if you're not in a team, these are just good principles in the context of living your life. So even if you're not in leadership, and this doesn't apply to anything in the context of your team, it will apply to each of us as we seek to just live good, productive lives in following Jesus. So I want to read from Philippians chapter 2. Now I've got Romans 16 there in brackets. We'll refer to that. We won't read that. But just for sake of time, I want to read from Philippians chapter 2. Verse 19, and in this passage Paul refers to two people that he has a very close and special relationship with. And it says this, verse 19 of Philippians 2, he says, I hope in the Lord Jesus to send Timothy to you soon, that I also may be cheered when I receive news about you. I have no one else like him who will show genuine concern for your welfare. For everyone looks out for their own interests, not those of Jesus Christ. But you know that Timothy has proved himself, because as a son with his father, he has served with me in the work of the gospel. I hope, therefore, to send him as soon as I see how things go with me. And I am confident in the Lord that I myself will come soon. Verse 25, but I think it necessary to send back to you Epaphroditus, my brother, co-worker, and fellow soldier, who is also your messenger, whom you sent to take care of my needs. For he longs for all of you and is distressed because you heard he was ill. Indeed, he was ill and almost died. But God had mercy on him, and not only him only, but also on me, to spare me sorrow upon sorrow. Therefore, I'm all the more eager to send him, so that when you see him again, you may be glad, and I may have less anxiety. So then welcome him in the Lord with great joy, and honor people like him, because he almost died for the work of Christ, risking his life to make up for the help you yourselves could not give me. Okay? And then we'll refer to Romans 16 in just a moment. So when it comes to the Apostle Paul, forgive the sort of agedness of this image, but when it comes to the Apostle Paul, we do tend to think of him as a bit of a lone ranger. And actually, New Testament evidence suggests nothing could be further from the truth. Paul was, in fact, committed to relationships. He was committed to building those relationships. He was committed to developing and growing young men in the context of his ministry. And actually, contrary to a perception, Paul is rarely seen on his own. Now, there are a few occasions in the book of Acts where he seems to be on his own, but very, very few. When you consider the amount of information we have about Paul and the amount of letters that he writes in the New Testament, there are actually very few occasions when he is on his own. So this idea that he's some sort of super apostle, he's this sort of he-man of the Christian world, and he doesn't need anybody, and he can just do it on his own and get on with things, is really absolutely not true. Sometimes in the context of Christian growth and Christian experience, we hear phrases like this, which sort of sound right to begin with, but when you examine them, they're really not correct. And growing up in church, I would often hear this phrase, one man with God is a majority. Now, that's true, and yet it's also not the whole truth. That's the problem with a statement like that. So here's what it suggests. It suggests that me and God alone are enough. Now, in one sense, in certain contexts, that can be true. But actually, that phrase goes against the overall drive of the Bible. In fact, the Bible encourages us not to be alone, but to be in the context of our community and with our friends. So we've got to be careful of those slogans which sort of sound true, and in a certain context they can be, but actually they reinforce this idea that I can be a bit of a lone ranger. And actually the New Testament especially, but even the Old Testament, really challenges that as an idea in life in general and in leadership specifically. Now that's really, really important. And what we tend to do when we look at great heroes of the Bible, or when we look at great heroes in church history, is we read their biography and we say things like Hudson Taylor, a great missionary, achieved great things. Well, that's true. But he achieved great things because he was surrounded by great people. You know, David Livingstone went off and did great things. Well, yes, that's true. But read the biography, read the story, and you'll find that he couldn't do it alone. That actually a whole network of people made that possible. We may say, for example, Bill Hybels, who's the senior leader of Willow Creek, Bill Hybels has built a great church. Well, that's true, but it's not the whole truth. Bill Hybels can't build a great church on its own. I was watching the football this week when Portugal were playing, and to see the world's greatest player, Ronaldo, made to look very ordinary because he's playing with a very ordinary team. You see, a super talented individual in a very ordinary team equals ordinary. A team of ordinary people who work and, as it were, support each other can produce something even greater than the sum total of their skills. So there was Ronaldo, this brilliant footballer, completely frustrated because he's surrounded by people who maybe aren't as good as him, and in a sense everybody's looking to him to be the answer, when the Germans proved again that the football is a team sport. And that's a challenge to us. So don't think of Paul as, okay, we're going to, can I just talk? Yeah. Are you okay? Because this is being recorded on this. Don't think of Paul as a lone ranger. It is just not true. And he says this in the passage for us. He says this, but I think it necessary to send back to you Epaphroditus. Note those three expressions. They're absolutely gorgeous. They're all linked. My brother, literally the word there means from the same womb. My brother, my fellow worker or co-worker, and my fellow soldier, someone who fights alongside me. And it's that phrase co-worker that I want you to see there because it's really important. It just sounds there like Paul has someone who's just serving him. But the word is gorgeous. Now I'll put the original word up for you in the language that it's written in. And the word there is sunergos. It's a beautiful word which literally means with to work. That's the idea of the word. Sun, the same or with, and ergos or ergo, to work. So the idea that Paul is saying is not that Epaphroditus worked for me, but he's saying Epaphroditus worked with me. Yes? J. John sometimes says, behind every great man is a surprise woman. And that may be true. That might be true. But actually that slogan, that's the sort of thing my granny would have said. Behind every good man, actually no, my granny, she wouldn't have said that actually. But behind every good man is a good woman. I actually would challenge that. I wouldn't say behind, I would say beside. Now I know it sounds like I'm playing with words, but there's power in words. That actually the power of relationships that we're talking about is not me as Superman and everybody behind me making me look like Superman, but actually it's me understanding that if I'm going to be everything God wants me to be and do the sorts of things God wants me to do, I have to be committed not only to ministry, but I have to be committed to building beside relationships. Relationships with people that aren't just behind me, but people that are with me. And that's so important. We don't just want to be someone that's out there doing it and hoping that we've got this support network. That's a very selfish, and I would say secular view of how to build friendships. Biblical view is not for me, but with me. We're standing side by side. And that's the idea of this gorgeous word. And it's used 13 times in the New Testament, that word. And actually, Paul uses it 12 of those 13 times. Every single time Paul uses it, he's referring to a person or people who support him, who are standing with him. And again, it reinforces this idea, Paul is not standing alone. He is working with others, but he's not just working with them, he's doing life with them. He's building life with them. He's actually walking in relationship with them. Here's some of the examples that I've got for you. You can see on the screen. You can look at these references for yourself. A number of them are in Romans 16, where Paul lists a huge amount of people who are supporting him and standing with him. This incredible group of people that are there. And in Romans 16, he refers to Priscilla and Aquila as being workers with him, friends who are standing with him. Urbanus, Timothy, Titus, Clement, Justus, Philemon, Mark, Aristarchus, Demas, and Luke, all in one verse, all referred to in the same way. Now, the reason I'm stressing that and giving that to you is because I really, really want you to understand the power of this. That Paul does not stand alone. He stands with others, and others stand with him. Now, was Paul a talented man? Absolutely. Was he a gifted communicator? Undoubtedly. Was he a brilliant scholar? Absolutely. Premier League scholar. The man is in many ways an outstanding person, but he doesn't stand alone. Even with all those outstanding gifts, Paul builds relationships into his life. He builds community into his life because he understands the power of community. A man called Jim Collins wrote a secular leadership book called Good to Great. And in that, he refers to the temptation of being a genius with 1,000 helpers. This idea that a great organization is built by one genius person with lots of helpers who just help that genius person be a genius. All right? And actually, that's a bit of a myth. It just looks like this genius person. Can I just say that that also happens in our churches? We almost at times treat maybe our leaders or even our pastor or our senior leader in that sort of way sometimes. He or she are the ones with all the gifts and we're just there to help them, support them. But actually that again is an alien concept. It's an alien idea. This idea that one person has all the ability and we just sort of cheer them on. This is just not the idea within the context of the Bible. There's a lovely African proverb and it goes like this. If you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. Yep. If you want to go fast, go alone. Absolutely. You can get a long way on your own. Although I would say eventually you will slow down. Even when you're on your own, no matter how brilliant you are or how superb you are. But if you want to go far in life, then go together. I was sitting with a young leader today. He's 27, 28 years of age. He is the senior leader of a church campus in the north of England, and he came down just to talk to me. He'd been through Bible college. And of course, students sometimes hear you teach them in Bible college the stuff that you want them to learn about ministry. But because they've no context to that teaching, you know, they hear it and they say, yeah, it was great. And then they go into their world and it doesn't mean anything until they get into their world. And then they go, oh, I remember being taught that, but I don't remember what it was. And this is exactly what happened. He said, can I come and spend some time with you on some of the stuff you taught us in Bible college? And one of the things I really urged him to do today was the whole idea of build strong relationships in your life. You don't have to have lots of them, but you have to build some of them. And the danger is he's 28 years of age, he's single, and of course he's just taken over the leadership of this church. So, you know, he's just going at it 24/7 sort of thing. He worked for the first 6 months without a single day off. All right? He's just going for it, doing it, trying to prove everybody that he's Superman. And the danger with all of that, of course, is that he ends up neglecting the sorts of structures in his life that will long-term make him a success. So no matter how gifted and talented he is, he has to commit himself not just to be a great leader or a great preacher or whatever it is he is. He has to commit himself to be a great person. And that's what great leadership is ultimately about. Not your giftedness. We've all got measures of giftedness which will mean certain things. What makes us great people are not just the things we do, but the person we are. What makes us great people are the relationships within our lives. Some of you read some of my books, and in the introduction I always or often have put this phrase, this slogan in terms of the acknowledgements, that the people around me make me look much better than I am. And that's the truth, you see. That's the reality. That actually, when we build strong relationships of people who stand with us, it actually makes us look better as an individual than we actually are. And the irony is that we try to stand out as an individual by working hard and being special. And actually the Bible teaches us that we stand out as individuals by being in community. It's almost a contradiction. So our world would say, if you want to stand out from the crowd, you've got to be different. You've got to be unique. You've got to let your individuality shine. And I understand all of that. God actually teaches us that your individuality will shine more when you're in a group, when you're in the context of relationships, because that's when people see how truly unique you are. If you're standing alone, you're not unique. You're standing alone. But if you're in a group of other people, your uniqueness is seen more, because your uniqueness is contrasted against the other people. So actually there's this incredible idea that we are to stand with people and allow people to stand with us. Now, can I just say, and we'll talk about some of this from a biblical perspective, relationships, good relationships with relationships are hard work. So they won't come cheap. And I meet people all the time who want fantastic quality relationships without paying. And it doesn't happen. It's just like every other area of life. If you live cheap and nasty, you get cheap and nasty ultimately. If you want quality, you have to pay quality. You have to invest. So if you want great relationships, it's going to cost you time. It may even cost you money, in that to build those relationships, you may have to travel, engage, invest, whatever. It's certainly going to cost you something of yourself. You can't build great relationships and remain a stoic island, untouched, unmoved, invulnerable, if that's a word. You have to allow yourself to be found. In Swahili, there's a gorgeous phrase or expression. When people greet each other, they say, "I see you. I see you." It's a gorgeous thing. And when we were in Kenya with our family a few years ago, we went to a settlement with some of the Maasai warriors, and we heard this expression, "I see you," and it means that actually not just "how are you," because half the time we say "how are you" to people and they don't really care. How you doing? And you just walk on. But actually, "I see you" is I engage with you. I'm meeting with you heart to heart, face to face, and that's a lovely idea. Now, seeing people will cost. Seeing people is expensive. Seeing people is not easy, and that's why lots of people sort of give up in this journey, because it's just too much like hard work. But the hard work is worth it. And actually, when we say hard work, of course, we don't mean, let's just get this over with. We're not talking about that. But what I mean is, you've got to put energy into it. You actually have to be intentional about building those relationships. I don't know about you. I could show you my calendar on the iPad. And listen, I could fill, like many of you, my calendar 3 or 4 times over with stuff, with work. The danger is, I fill it with stuff and not with people. So quite literally, Dawn and I work very, very hard at not only, please forgive me for this language, not only scheduling time for each other. Sounds weird when you're scheduling time for the person you're living with. But she's very busy working for the church. I'm very busy. If we're not careful, we just don't have ICU time. Yeah, do you know what I mean? So our hearts don't meet. Oh, we're in the same house, we're even in the same bed, but we're not actually meeting each other. And you've got to create those opportunities. But we also work very hard at building relationships with friends. We preserve certain evenings and certain times where we can have people to dinner, where we can go to their home, where we can spend some time with them. We have to work really, really hard. We're trying to introduce social culture into many of our key teams in renewal, because some of them aren't used to that. They're used to working with each other but not living together. You know, I'm not saying we have to sort of live in each other's pockets to be a great team, but it does help when we learn to know each other. It does help us to learn to work together. And we're having a big barbecue. We try to do 4 or 5 social events a year as a whole team, which is not easy. So you're trying to get, you know, somewhere between 30 and 50 people with spouses and children all gathered together. And it's not always easy to do that. But we really wanted to make that strong. And it's interesting when you say to people, this is not an option. You have to come. Unless, you know, you've got an absolute other priority. Like one of our members of team has a family wedding. So that's we get that. But actually you have to, and 1 or 2 people give us a bit of pushback. What do you mean I have to come? I've got other things to do. Yeah, join the queue, man. I've got a trillion things to do. I could do something better with my Saturday than spend it with a barbecue with you. Well, it's true. I've got 3 children, one of them living up north that we only see a few times a year. We've got a house that we need to do work on. We've got things that we would love to do as a family. Saturday's our only family day. Dawn and I love going for walks. We love doing stuff together. Hey, listen, I've got stuff to do as well. See, that's the issue. When it comes to building great relationships, there will always be something else you could do. Always. Because that's life. But when we understand the power of together, we will make room and time for what's important to us. Now, if it's not important to you, that's okay. But I'm saying, if we're going to be men and women who make a long-term impact with our lives, the quality of our relationships will be a factor. Is that okay? All right, then let's keep moving, because we'll have a wee break in about 15, 20 minutes or so, and then we're going to finish for 8:45 to 9. Isn't that right, Joe? Come on. All right, then. The boss is telling me what to do, so that's what I'm going to do. Let me just move through this for you, just in terms of building a bit of a biblical case before we look at some practicalities. We are designed to be together. And actually, right from the beginning, it says this. It's not good, God says, of the man, for man to be alone. It says, I will make, or let us make, a helper suitable for him. Now, 2 words that stand out in that statement. Number 1 is the word alone. Now, the word alone there doesn't mean lonely. In the context of that language, it literally means separated from an essential part. All right, that's the picture. So let me give you a picture of alone. If I cut my arm off and threw it on the floor, my arm would be alone. All right? In other words, I've separated my arm from an essential part to make my arm work. See that? That's what it means. So it doesn't just mean, oh, poor Adam, he's lonely. Adam wasn't lonely. Adam couldn't spell the word lonely. Adam didn't know what lonely was. Adam, that was his existence. He was completely happy and content. But he was alone. And God deliberately designs creation in this way to show us something, that actually one person on their own is incomplete. Now, please don't go to marriage on this, because that's where everybody jumps. Just hold the thought on marriage for 5 minutes and just think about human community. God isn't just building a marriage here. He's building a principle of human community that reflects his own Godhead. One God represented in 3 persons, a holy community. Well, when God makes humanity in his image, he's making humanity in community. The image. So, what happens is, God makes one become 2, and 2 become 1. All right? That's the power of community. So this is built into the very DNA of human beings. It's not just a good idea to have mates. It's actually the way you're designed. So I would go so far, it's not just a good idea to have friends, you need friends. You need strong human relationships that you can connect to that actually help complete you. Now, I'm not talking about marriage. It may, for some of us, it applies to marriage because we found someone who literally completes us in different ways, okay? That's a wonderful and remarkable thing. But of course, that doesn't apply to everybody. And some people have had some very bad experiences in the context of that. But widen it out and think about human community. That when we stand alone, we are incomplete. But when we connect with others in heart and in soul and in mind, then actually something supernatural takes place in terms of our design. The second word here is remarkable. Translated here, it's helper. It could be translated partner. I know some Christians who don't, when it comes to marriage, they don't like the word partner, and yet it's very biblical. Don't just relax about language. We can define words whatever way we want, ultimately. And actually, the idea of partnership is completely biblical. Now, I know some people use the word partner to be living together and unmarried. But if you use the word partner biblically, which is what we're trying to do, claim the word back. The word means one who stands alongside to support. And it's interesting, this word's used over 70 times in the Old Testament. And it's often used of God. It's never used of an inferior. It's always used of an equal or a superior. And one of my favourite Psalms in the whole of the Bible says, I look to the hills, from where does my help come? My help, this word, etzer, my help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. What's the idea of help there? Someone who draws alongside you and supports you. So when God makes the woman out of the man, interestingly, out of the side of the man, not the head, not the feet, the side, and there's lots of conversation around the symbolism of the side of the man. He's not making an inferior, he's making an equal, and he's not making the woman to serve the man, he's making the man and woman to partner together for the same purpose. That's really important. That's it. So now we apply that to marriage, and that's absolutely fine, and there's space for that. But if you didn't go to marriage and you just stopped there at human community, that's the principle. It's finding people like Paul found who can stand side to side with us and help us as we go forward, and also for us to help them. So it's not just, I need relationships for me. No, we need relationships for others. So there's a mutual benefit in not only receiving in a relationship, but in giving. And in fact, I would say, the more we learn to give in the context of a relationship, provided it's healthy and functional, the more we get out of that relationship. It helps us. So, this idea of Superman, standing alone, supreme, an individual with the body of a god, is mythical. In fact, I would say if you try to be Superman, you end up being stupid man. All right? Seriously, I would be as strong as that. If you think you can make it on your own, you are stupid. And I use the word stupid properly. And that is, you've made a decision to go against your design. That's just a stupid thing to do. And lots of people over the years have isolated themselves and thought, I can do this on my own, only to come unstuck and only to see their lives crushed and destroyed. Now again, this is not easy, this stuff. But the more we commit to it, actually, the better it becomes in the long run. So that's we're designed to be together. But what's the power of together? We may have touched on some of this stuff in the context of team, but let me again run through this for you, because this is very, very powerful as a biblical base. We're not going to read this. You can read it for yourself. But Ecclesiastes 4 talks about the power of togetherness. And again, we often apply this to marriage, but in the context, it's not talking about marriage. It's talking about human community. And here's what it says: two are better than one. Now, of course, two are only better than one when two work as one. All right? If two work as two, they're no better than one working on their own. So The power of two being better than one is that two work together as one. All right? And that's very, very important. So, what does this passage say? Well, a couple of things it says. Two are better than one. Why? Because number one, they have good return for their work. Now, this speaks to us of synergy. Now, it's interesting. The word that we used, that Paul uses, that gorgeous word synergos, is the root that we get the word synergy from. And sometimes when I use the term synergy in churches, I used it recently in the context of our own church, and someone came at me saying that I was introducing business language into the church. Well, even if I was, it's a good word. But the reality is, I actually said to this person, it's not a business word, it's a Bible word. Microsoft did not invent synergy. Apple did not invent synergy. God invented synergy. In fact, God himself, listen to this, I know this is hard to get our heads around, but God cannot do anything without agreeing with himself. That's a synergistic principle, the synchronizing of our energy, the drawing together. So two are better than one. Why? If they truly work side by side, heart to heart, then they have good return for their work. In other words, they can produce more together than their individual parts added up. That's the idea of synergy. So, here I am. I'm a two, and here's Joe. Joe's a two. So you would think, well, if we add me and Joe together, we get a 4. Absolutely. So separately, we end up producing a 4. But the Bible says if we work heart to heart, side by side, we don't produce 4, we produce 8. We produce more than the sum totals of our parts added up. That's synergy. It's a mystical, mysterious, magical, glorious idea that shouldn't work but does. That's why sometimes you have churches and communities and people who are, you may hear the expression, punching above their weight. You ever heard that expression? You're punching above your weight. In other words, you seem to be achieving more than you should be able to achieve on paper. That's synergy. That's the idea of coming together. So God says to Adam and Eve, rule the earth, subdue the earth, and fill the earth. Goodness gracious me. That's a tall order for 2 people. But he gives them that command on the basis of 2 working as 1. When the 2 work as 1, they can achieve all of those things. And it is remarkable what we can achieve together when we build strong side-by-side relationships within our lives. So, synergy. Second statement is made in verse 10. It says, if one falls down, his friend can help him up, but pity the man who falls and has no one to help him. Okay? Now, what's that speaking of? Well, second principle is one of support. That actually, when we build strong relationships, we have confidence that if we stumble and fall and make a mistake, someone will be there to catch us. And if they can't catch us, to help us get back up. It's a terrible thing to see someone fall down and no one rush to help them. Yeah? Everybody stands waiting for each other. Ooh, who's going to help them? Yeah? But if you're related to that person, that was your mother, or your father, or your brother or sister, or your children, you'd be there. Instinctively, you're the first to move. True? Well, let's hope so. True? Now, if you're not connected to that person, humanity reaches out, but you're sort of a bit hesitant because you're waiting for somebody else to move. Maybe someone else will do this. But if you're connected to them, you should be the first to move. Yep. And one of the things you discover in Christian ministry is this, and I love being in the church. I hate people criticizing the church, I have to say. Now, I've been married to the church a very, very long time. So I know she's not perfect. All right? But I've got over it. I mean, a lot of very naive, shallow people who judge the church on her imperfections and don't see the bigger picture on stuff. I mean, if you come to our church, look, within a couple of hours, you're going to find some stuff you don't like. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to work it out. We're just a community of imperfect people. working together. Now, that doesn't excuse bad practice. We're not talking about that. We're just talking about the stuff of life. It happens. I love the church, and I'm a bit tired of people criticizing the church and pulling the church apart when it's still the most magnificent thing on the planet in changing people's lives and transforming them. But here's one of the big dangers of Christian ministry. People attach themselves to you because of what you do, not because of who you are. All right? And then here's what happens. When you stop doing what you do, you find out you've no friends. Now, that's been a challenge to a previous generation. Be careful what I'm saying, I know this is recorded, but my father-in-law, who was 30 years in ministry, has struggled tremendously with this. So his whole value system was built around doing, and therefore many of his relationships were doing relationships. They weren't being relationships. Now, when you take away the doing, then there's no reason to connect. Now, you've got to watch that. You've got to watch that your friendships aren't actually work relationships in a friendship code. Now, that's a tough one. No easy answer to that, but you've got to work, you've got to drill down on that. When I left my first church and went into, got a part-time job in a school while I was waiting to take up my second post, it was amazing the amount of people who didn't call. And you realize, and I'm not being bitter or cynical, you just realize, do you know what? I haven't worked hard enough at real friendships. What I've settled for are ministry connections. Now, that's still pretty good. I mean, ministry connections are great, but it's not friendship. There are lots of people in Christian ministry who don't have any friends. And I think that's pretty sad. I think it's pretty tragic. We've got to watch that doesn't happen, because that's not natural. My senior pastor in the first church that I pioneered in Yorkshire, he was taught in Bible college, as a pastor, don't have friends. He was actually taught that in Bible college. Now, I still can't really understand why he was taught that, but that's what he was taught. And I think that's just desperately destructive. Third statement is this: also, if two lie down together, they will keep warm, but how will one keep warm alone? Now, when we use this passage in a marriage context, we often talk about, the pleasure of sex and being together in the same bed. But of course, in the days of Solomon, he was talking about families that would share the bed. Some of us still remember the days of sharing beds with brothers and sisters, 4 or 5 of you in the one room. My brother and I shared the attic room in Belfast. I was 8 years old before we had central heating. You could scrape the ice off the inside of the window. Yeah, you're with me. It's obviously, struck a chord with some of you. I mean, it still had an outside toilet when I was 8 years old, until my parents built a bit of an extension and splashed out and put central heating in our house in Belfast. What a thing that was. It was marvellous, the good old days, absolutely. And me and my brother in the attic room, it makes me sound old, but I'm not that old, right? Me and my brother in the attic room during winter, with 4 central heating, would have a couple of layers of clothes on, and then we would get into bed together, and we would wrap each other together. Yeah? Not in any sexual way, just life, to keep warm. All right? That's the idea here. It's the idea that when you are alone, you're cold. All right? And the beautiful picture here is one of sustenance, because do you know when you get cold, don't you slow down? Yes. It gets harder to do stuff, doesn't it? But when your body heats up, literally, actually, there are even health benefits for some people. They get into even a warmer climate, and their joints start to free up, because the cold slows them down and makes them vulnerable. And when your body drops in its core temperature, you literally are in danger. Whereas when your core temperature comes up, health returns to your bones. So there's a literal sustenance here. When you're in community, there's sustenance. You draw energy from the heat of your friends. I don't mean literally heat, all right? But I mean the energy of their life. How many times have you had dinner with people or sat with people, have coffee, and you come away feeling, come on, how to do this. Yeah? Why? Because you've drawn energy from them. You've picked something up. You got with them. And I love being with people who energize me. Yeah? Now, when you're standing alone and you take a knock or two, your energy levels start to drop. Even the most optimistic person in this room, even like the, I can do it sort of a person, you get a few kicks and a few knocks and a few slaps, and you start to feel the cold. And then you start to believe your own PR, and you start to believe you're on your own and the world's against you and everybody hates you. And you're going to die. Do you know? You do. You start to believe your own imagination. But when you're with friends, you draw the warmth of their energy. Yeah? Can I just say this? I'll say it quite openly and vulnerably to you. My friends, and I would include my wife in this context, my friends have saved my life. Yeah. I haven't reached too many moments where I wanted to quit Christian ministry. Genuinely, I think there were 2 moments in my life where I genuinely could have quit Christian ministry because of stuff that was going on in our world. And in both times, what saved me were 2 things. Number 1 was a revelation of God's commitment to me, that he actually loved me. And he just said to me, don't quit. I love you. Keep going. And secondly, the energy, the warmth of outstanding friends who wrapped their bodies around me and said, John, come on, you're cold. Let me warm you up. You'll be all right. You'll be all right once you get a bit of heat in your body. Yeah? All right? That makes sense? All right, then. Here's the last wee picture, and we'll have a quick break. Though one may be overpowered, 2 can defend themselves, for a cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. This is just beautiful imagery that we sometimes miss in the context of our world, and it just speaks of strength. So note the progression. Let me show you this. This is really gorgeous, and the numerics in this verse are beautiful. Look at this. It goes 1, 2, 3, and it's deliberate. Though one may be overpowered. So what it means is, as an individual, you may be able to withstand your enemy. You're a strong person, and you may be able to push back and stand. But actually, you're vulnerable. And when you stand alone, you are vulnerable. More vulnerable than you need to be. Now, it doesn't mean you're going to fall over, but it means you're more likely to. Okay? Secondly, 2 can defend themselves. The idea of this sort of back-to-back defense, shoulder to shoulder, back to back, standing together, defending one another and fighting for one another. What a beautiful, beautiful image that is. And then a cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. The idea here, the picture of the rope, which is very, very powerful. So what you get is this progression, and it's deliberate. God wants us to move from 1 to 2 to 3. All right? So the imagery we get is that actually our movement should be away from aloneness to connectedness. That's the imagery within the verse. And so we move from 1, independence, to 3, interdependence. Make sense? We move from 1, I, to 3, we. We. We move from 1, isolation, to 3, community. And then we move from 1, ego, sorry, it's a bit cheesy this, to 3, we go. Sorry about that. It took me months to make that up. All that Bible college training kicked in after all. All right? Ego to we go. All right? The idea of just standing alone. And here's what I want you to see in the context of this. Look at this picture. It's one of my favorite pictures. It's one of the most replicated war pictures in the history of humanity. It's the raising of the flag in Iwo Jima when the Americans started fighting. In fact, the irony is of this story is the flag is being raised at the start of the conflict, not at the end, on Mount Suribachi. And most people don't know this. This is just a piece of useless information. That's the second raising of the flag. The first flag, the admiral on the ship wanted it because it was, it's very prestigious to take the flag that was raised in victory, even though they hadn't won yet. And so he sent his men up the mountain, get me that flag, which generals are likely to do. And he sent them up. They took down the original flag, and then someone said, well, we still need a flag. This is the raising of the second flag. And a young man called David Rosenthal standing, fumbling with his camera, just trying to sort of get it in focus, fumbling around, click, and he took this picture. Now, here's a remarkable, useless piece of information, but I'll give you goose pimples if you like this sort of stuff, is that when he sent his roll of film to be developed, this was the only slide that survived. Isn't that amazing? I mean, it's just a stunning story. And it became, America raised $7 billion on US war bonds on that picture. Now, here's what I want you to see in the picture. Look at the men in the picture. With the exception of the man at the front, if you look at the people standing at the back, what you notice is when you look at them long enough, they sort of mesh into one person. That's what makes this picture amazing. Stunning. And if you go to Washington, you can see the actual replica of this as a bronze statue in Washington. They mesh into one. There's actually 6 men in this picture. Yeah, 6. 3 of them died on the island, and then 3 survived. 1 eventually committed suicide. 1 died as an alcoholic, and the other one lived to a ripe old age. And it's his son who writes about the story, Flags of Our Fathers. But there we are. 6 men in the picture, but they look like one man. See that? That's the image of the rope. Now, let me show you this. This is really important. Biblical image is not chain. Biblical image of community is rope. So what's the difference? Well, a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. So in other words, if you put pressure on one link of the chain, no matter how amazing that chain is, you can break it. A rope, however, is strands of individual, very, very weak strands, really. A child could break the individual strand of a rope, but the genius of a rope is that the strands are intertwined continuously with other strands to provide this incredible strength. And the only way you can destroy a rope, now I know people say, well, you snap a rope or you break a rope, but you don't destroy a rope like that. You destroy a rope by unraveling it. That's how you destroy a rope. Now you can cut a rope, but the rope, the cut section is still intact. You know, the rope is still there, so you can still use sections of the cut rope. If you want to destroy a rope, you've got to unpick it, unravel it. And that's the idea of Ecclesiastes. God says when you intertwine with others, you become a rope. Now people will say, well, the cord of 3 strands is me, my wife, and God. Well, that's cool. You can apply that. But actually, that's not what the context says. The context is talking about human beings intertwining. And when human beings intertwine, they become a rope, which is very, very strong and very, very dynamic. Does that make sense? Yeah. That's the power of relationships. That's the power. That's why it's so important for me and you as we stand together. And in the context of Christian ministry, that's why it's important to put energy into it. Because it becomes a rope-like structure in our lives. Not a link in a chain. God help us. If you're relying on me to be the link in your chain, God help us all. But if we're rope intertwined, my strengths get subsumed into your weaknesses, and your weaknesses and my weaknesses get subsumed into the strengths of others. So it all gets meshed together so that we end up producing something really strong. Is that okay? Yeah.